Welcome to the Nonprofit Edge, a podcast series to promote purpose in practice. Each week, this webinar series features an extraordinary individual that provides valuable and impactful services, helping to transform the capabilities of their nonprofit clients. Join us as we explore a variety of topics, all vital to the success of nonprofit organizations. Learn and grow from the experience and expertise of our featured guests. Without further delay, let's introduce you to the host of the Nonprofit Edge podcast series, Looney.
Hey all, welcome to another episode of the Nonprofit Edge, where we explore the leadership strategies shaping the future of the nonprofit sector. One of the greatest determinants of an organization's success isn't its strategic plan, fundraising program, or even the strength of its mission. It's whether the board of directors and the executive team are truly aligned. When those two leadership bodies share the same vision, trust one another, and clearly understand their distinct responsibilities, organizations move forward with confidence. And when they don't, even great organizations can lose momentum. Today's guest is Stuart Wachs, founder and CEO of the Impact Group. Stuart has spent decades helping CEOs, executive teams, and boards improve organizational performance by strengthening leadership, governance, strategy, and culture. His work focuses on helping organizations become more intentional, more aligned, and ultimately more effective. And today we're discussing one of the most important relationships in nonprofit leadership. How do boards and executive teams stay united around the same mission and priorities while respecting the different roles each must play? So, Stuart, welcome to the Nonprofit Edge.
It's great to be here, Chris. Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
I am too. And you have a distinct record here that remains unbroken. Of our 24 episodes that we've done, you are the only returning guest so far.
Woo! All right, I
Right?
like that.
That's got to mean something.
I
No
hope so. I
offense
hope
to
I
all
live
of
up to
those.
whatever that expectation is, sir.
Yeah, there were 22 other great interviews, but no offense to them. But you are number two. And I always think of Saturday Night Live when they have like the guest competition for who can host the most times. So
Yeah. All right. Well, it's an honor, sir, an honor.
wonderful. Well, thank you for joining. And let's begin with the big picture. When you begin working with an organization, what tells you the board and executive team are genuinely aligned or heading in different directions?
Absolutely. Well, I don't know where occasion they might come to me specifically for those challenges, but we'll leave that obvious one to the side. I think some of the big tells, if you will be if my engagement is primarily driven by the CEO or ED, on the staff leadership side. Usually, even without asking, if there are tensions, they will come up. Blaming the board's not supporting, the board's not pulling their weight. I feel handheld by the board, because that ED or CEO is really usually wanting to drive performance, drive impact, achieve those goals. So it's usually going to come up pretty early in the conversation, or within the whole leadership team. When I've done just a retreat with the board, including ED, CEO, or leadership team, it'll usually come out in the planning when we kind of
Mm,
start talking what we want to do, what goals are. And it's amazing, even though there's written mission and maybe values and maybe even a strategic plan, how sometimes there's misalignment on that, or just whose role it is to do what. A lot of it is functions, roles, ownership. Even when you have great people that truly are passionate and like each other, more times than not, there's not really been effort to have that clarity there.
yeah, yeah. Well, that leads into the follow-up question, which is why so many nonprofits struggle with alignment, even when everyone is committed to the same mission.
Yeah, couple thoughts on that. One, I might not make me popular with some of the listeners. Some of the time, I think the ED or CEO, it can be comforting to kind of follow the board's directive and kind of look at them as the employer or the boss, which then can tend to create your own challenges of being the CEO or ED, but kind of putting yourself in a situation of being the general manager, if you know what I mean, which can create all kinds of grayness. And what rarely happens either in the strategy planning or execution planning or scorecards or anything like that is it's done in unison for the agency, which on one end is good, but then it's not separated out between the board and the leadership. Tell you, one of my clients that I do my full growth services with, my work is with their leadership team. They have a leadership team of five. But I engaged a little bit with the board, and the board was loving the growth and the impact of what was happening, but recognizing they were kind of left out. So we now do both. We do that initial work with the leadership team because they're really ones driving it. And then we actually do a board retreat to make sure there's alignment on those 3 year and 1 year goals and priorities, and then kind of do the board's own function and accountability work and ownership work. So there's not only delineation of roles and goals, but they're still truly in alignment to drive that organization to where they want to be.
Okay. Okay. But what does true alignment actually look like? And maybe this is an opportunity to kind of define alignment.
Okay.
It's a buzzword, right?
Yeah,
It
yeah,
sounds
yeah,
so
yeah.
cool. Who wouldn't want alignment,
Yeah.
right? But what does that mean? What does it look like?
Yeah, great. And this would be the case if you're talking about a business or a nonprofit or just the board, but keep it in this concept of the board and staff leadership.
Yeah.
Alignment to me has a couple key areas. It really starts with that foundational, and if you've read Lencioni's like five dysfunctions, that pyramid of trust. There's probably not really alignment if there's not strong trust amongst the board and board members, ELT members, and them collectively. But
Yeah.
otherwise, you have kind of nodding the head agreement, not really alignment. People aren't really challenging and pushing, being heard and listening. So a big part of getting to alignment is really having that trust to speak your mind, do it respectively, push and shove in a great conversation, throw the uncomfortable on the table. If you're doing that, all those conversations will happen. So you don't end up with, yes, it's a unanimous vote. We all agree on this direction or this strat plan, but it's superficial. So that trust is foundational. What really looks like is you've had that trust, you've had those meaningful conversations. Everybody can articulate, if not word for word, they can articulate your purpose, why you're existing as an organization, not your mission, but your why, your purpose. And they can articulate where you're going and how you're going to get there. And rarely does that happen in either of those groups, let alone them combined, because it takes taking that alignment through purpose and having that trust, having a clearly delineated goals and strategy, and then really what is that executable plan to get there, and everybody understands it. And that last step is I do a lot of work on ownership, not necessarily who owns the nonprofit, but ownership of getting there. And
Yeah.
everybody kind of knows their role in getting it there. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
the last step of alignment is then there's some type of reporting, dashboard, conversations on whatever the right cadence is, where everybody knows how they're doing, and they can ask the questions and challenge and push and celebrate and reward.
Yeah. No, that's great. And getting to that alignment is obviously the objective. And when you're there, and even before when you're getting there, you don't have to have agreement all the time, right? There's it's okay to disagree or to contest an opinion or a thought. That's not the definition of alignment where you all think the same.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, Chris. Chris had pulled that out. Agreement, consensus are usually not great operating models or leadership models, and they definitely don't trigger alignment. But being able to have those healthy debates and conversations and challenges, and then ultimately, most likely, if you really have the right team on your ELT and the board, you're going to have some people that believed it should have gone a different way, but because they were able to put it out there, you've had those discussions, everything's challenged, now you've come to a decision. Everybody is going to end up aligned to that decision and what has to happen. But it should not be a yes, ma'am, yes, sir kind of environment. It shouldn't be one, the board chair or that real charismatic individual driving. Alignment is everybody's involvement and then an agreement.
Yeah. And what are the consequences? What happens when alignment breaks down? Like what do you see? What are the real kind of consequences? And I'm sure they're recoverable in a matter of time, but
Yeah.
what happens?
Yeah. A
What's the
couple things
cautionary
happen
tale
when,
here?
yeah, when there's lack of alignment, complete non-alignment, or that superficial type of alignment we were talking about. One is it will have a negative impact on the culture because you're going to have people that are having the parking lot conversations, water cooler conversations, and being negative. That whole chart where you do performance and culture, you're going to have a lot of pulling to the negative on the culture because people didn't have the opportunity to dive in, have those conversations, challenge and be challenged. Big thing that happens when there's not alignment is your execution and your growth and your move forward and your impact on your mission is going to be slower, less. You're not going to have the growth because we all know in all sectors, in the nonprofit sector, growing your impact and deepening that impact and growing the revenue so you can do that is not easy. And if you then have either strategy and plans that people aren't aligned on or that aren't clear, you're going to have people rowing in different directions, pushing in different directions, not supporting. And you may have a decent year, but you're not going to have the year you could have for the organization, and more importantly, for your constituents and those that you're having the impact on.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Um, so before organizations can work together effectively, they first have to understand who's responsible for what. And you touched on this before, how different roles, but shared purpose, that concept. So how
Yeah.
do you explain the distinction between governance and management in a way every board member can understand?
So if you look at the role of, we'll talk about again the role of the board as a unit and the role of that leadership team as a unit. Um, Most of the board's role is going to be shared with the CEO or maybe the whole leadership team. When you talk about strategy, there's some mindset that the board sets the strategy and then the leadership team executes on it. I don't prescribe to that either when I was a CEO or in my coaching, because just like in the business world, that CEO or ED really needs to play a pivotal role in creation. So strategy creation should be a partnership. Execution should be, especially if it's a mature, bigger nonprofit, on the leadership team and their staff. There might be things parsed out, like in fundraising, the board will play a role. And then there's really articulable roles that the board will play. The board's there to be brought up to speed on it, to evaluate and give input and be that governing body to make sure we the organization are moving in the direction that we should be moving in. And if there's major weaknesses or struggles, that board is aware so they can provide the support or whatever needs to be to that leadership team, to the CEO, etc. The board's prime role is to clearly hire and fire, if you will, the staff leader, but more importantly, to support, to evaluate, support, and be there for them unless it gets to a point where that isn't the right road, and then they have the
Right.
road to do there, and to ensure financial resources. That does not mean the board is responsible for bringing in all the pennies, but they're responsible either to make sure that leadership team has what they need and to do their role depending on the type of organization, usually on the fundraising side, less on the earned revenue side, and just to ensure it's there. And to really, I think on the vision, I think this is where a lot of nonprofits struggle, and there's a lot of this is mindset, is to really make sure the organization within that strategy and that vision, it's one that it can thrive in, that it goes from scarcity to abundance, and we're looking at what we need to invest in for growth, and overhead being a good thing, not a bad thing, and the board really nurturing that. So when they bring in the right ED or CEO and they're building a leadership team, they can thrive. They can take educated risks. They can do what they have to do and know they have the board there for advising, if that makes sense, and for support and kind of an advisory role.
Hmm. But yet, so many boards you see and I see and that exist are doing management,
Hmm.
and let's distinguish between the little league board that has no staff,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
with a professional organization, nonprofit organization that has staff, that
Yep,
has a CEO, that has
yep,
a pretty decent sized budget and a
yep.
responsibility to
Yeah,
impact the community in a strong way, right? That's what we're talking about. But
yeah.
yet, even those boards will start managing. And the question is, where do you often see boards unintentionally crossing into management
Yeah.
most frequently?
I think the biggest and most dangerous is when boards get involved with any employee or employee matter other than the CEO. To me,
Hmm.
and when I'm coaching a CEO, whether it's part of ongoing service or executive coaching, that's really a black and white line. Leave out, God forbid, ethical issues or those, but the board has one employee, and that is that CEO or ED, and they're entrusting that CEO and ED to build the team, hire the right people, drive the culture, creating an environment where those people can thrive and do what they have to do, make sure within them there's clarity on what they have to do. Now, the board can advise. When I was a CEO of a nonprofit and hiring a COO, I involved the board, but the
Right.
board knew very clearly they were not making a decision. There was no vote. They provided input to me, the hiring agent, just as I, by the way, did with staff that worked for me. So the staff is usually the biggest area where board tends to overstep. And I think the other one is when there's a shared role of strategy and a prime role on vision and purpose and mission with the board, when you have board members that maybe have expertise or experience or too much time on their hand, that they want to get in and then either tell the CEO how to do it or jump in and start doing staff work, which again, while sometimes can be a great resource, it really starts getting into that dangerous, cloudy area, because it doesn't allow the CEO to be the CEO and it can undermine them with other staff, etc.
Yeah, yeah. So far, we've made it sound like the board is always the bad actor in this scenario,
Unintentionally,
but
but fair. I, we,
but
we could go
we
the other way around too.
yeah, we have to. Yeah. So
Yeah, yeah.
conversely, where do the executive teams sometimes fail to engage their board strategically or overstep, or where
Yeah,
are the
yeah,
failures of the executive team
yeah.
in
Very fair.
relation to the board?
Because as you know, and that's why you brought up, it definitely goes both ways. And I've seen it beautiful due to both, and I've seen it not so beautiful due to either on the staff side or the board side. So I think on the CEO leadership team part, um, it's when they don't really embrace the board in their end of that strategy and vision piece and then get mad because there's not alignment or the board isn't in row and in line. I'm a big believer when you're pointing, look at those 4 or 8 fingers pointing back at you. That a lot of times, because it can be a lot of work, and your board chair changes every 2 or 4 years. But if that CEO isn't really owning part of their responsibility, which is nurturing that relationship and co-leading that relationship, and they're not really providing the board with the information and the opportunity to have that advising and that input and having a hand in that overall strategy, that's when board members understandably and rightfully get frustrated and either leave or start pushing and diving in deeper because they weren't given the ability and the support to do what their role is. And I think the other thing is that maybe that whether it's the ED or CEO's own issues or they haven't done the work to develop that trust, when they're not really having radical candor with the board, either sharing where they themselves are having challenges or the organization is, or I'm not, a slight sugar coating of things,
Yeah.
where they're not really, especially them with the board chair, that really sacred relationship, really sharing. It's not a time of show and tell. It's a time for advising and making aware and letting that board chair and through them, the board, know of those challenges before it's later than it should be. I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of times self-preservation, worry about their job, or the
Sure.
typical imposter syndrome that even amazing CEOs have of they have to have all the answers, they need to be right, which then
Mm,
they end up not having those conversations. And if it's a really good board chair, that's going to create problems. So it really, I've always looked at it when I was in the role or now in a coaching and advising role, it needs to be a real partnership. And there are times that's the board chair or board lacks, and there are also plenty of times I'm really glad you brought up, Chris, that CEO isn't doing their part to build that real partnership.
yeah, yeah. And I know there are exceptions to this rule, but based on the conversation we've just had and my understanding of the situation, it's often where the board tries to do too much and the CEO or the executive team shares too little. Right.
Yeah,
And I
yeah, it's an
know
excellent way. Yeah, I think that's
that's a
accurate from
simple
my,
where they get in trouble, I guess, right? And
yeah.
so it's fair to not have the exact same dilemma, I guess, for either party. But and there are millions of examples of how
Yeah.
that might be different. But it is interesting to see where most frequently the board overreaches and the executive leadership team just doesn't maybe
Underreaches or
share
whatever.
as much as they
Yeah.
should, right? But what about the CEO and the board chair? That is such a fascinating dynamic. I think I could actually write several books just on how those two personalities can either collide or create, I don't know, like Wonder Twins.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's fascinating. So when you look at the healthy partnership between the CEO and board chair, what does that look like to you?
Yeah. I'll start with feeding off of part of my answer to your last question. First and foremost, it's a partnership. If you either have the board chair looking at it that this is my employee, when yes, legally it is, but that should not be part of the mindset, or the CEO looking at it as this is my boss or this person controls my job. Because right away, you're going to build in all that ugly stuff that under reports, over reports, underachieves that you were talking about. So I think
Yep.
foundationally, truly setting up that relationship, having that conversation when the new CEO comes in, because they're starting there, or the next board chair comes in. I always did this when I was in that role of defining what this relationship is. And I don't think that happens enough. Defining it as a partnership, each one sharing what they need, each one sharing their lines in the sand, if you will, or what they need or how they want to communicate. Really look at it as if this is it's a different element, but your business partner or any kind of partnership. You need to establish that relationship, set boundaries, understand how you communicate, understand your differences, and then understand each of your expectation of each other. And I think the next
Yep.
step is getting aligned on, which is where you started this conversation, on management staff's role and board's role. So then together you can really lead that and lead the board agendas and conversations and scorecards for staff or metrics, whatever methodology that organization is using, that they're all feeding for the same purposes and they're all driving the same kind of lens. And I think way too often on both ends responsibility that doesn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's particularly helpful to hear you talk about the way they should not see each other to avoid, sort of the trap that prevents you from realizing that you're both on the same
Yeah,
side,
yeah.
right? So if board chair says you're my employee, you need to treat me this way or that way. And if the CEO is saying, listen, I have to be very guarded with you because, I could say one thing that you don't like and you could fire me, right? That is clearly misalignment, right?
100%. Yeah.
But that's very common,
Very, sadly, very
very common.
common.
And that needs to be nipped in the butt, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Eliminated. because that is not a healthy partnership.
Yeah. And I'll throw in there, especially the more mature organizations, ones like that we're talking about, Chris. It's also why a contract is so critical for a CEO of a nonprofit. Not to protect them from not doing their job, but to give them comfort and actually in that contract employment agreement outlining those roles. So it's crystal clear because if that organization really wants to have a CEO, they need to allow that person to run the organization. And if that CEO wants to be able to get all the type of support and advising, we talked about the board's role, they have to be able to have that kind of relationship. So it's somewhat like I have a business client that he has a board of advisors, investors, but he's the owner CEO, and it's different but similar. They have a role to see, in that case, see the numbers, understand the plan. But at the end of the day, the owner and CEO of that company is going to do what they're going to do. They're going to listen. They're going to take advice where it makes sense. And it's really a similar kind of thing. So the CEO also has to be comfortable doing that, putting themselves out there and assuming
Yeah.
that responsibility because ultimately they do have it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, a CEO perspective could easily be, well, I'm just going to line the board with friends who will treat me well, will see my side, take my
Yeah.
side, not push back. And I know that's not the answer,
Yeah.
especially for a healthy nonprofit that needs to serve more than just the CEO, but the community, right? But that's pretty common too, I think, to see a CEO continually add people that are not voicing challenging
Yeah.
opinions.
Yeah. I'd piggyback and even build on that, Chris, is absolutely, it's self-protection. It's a natural human trait, not a good one. Um, and I've also seen where the board does that themselves. What do you want to call it? The good old boy, a girl, girls club, where it's kind of, or the high school
Yeah, right.
clique,
No, right,
where
right, right,
where
right.
boards, yeah,
Fair,
I'm saying,
fair.
and both are just so bad. Because A, if the board's doing it, no new board members want to come on because
Right.
there isn't that dialogue. And the most important thing is, again, you're not kind of like we talked at the beginning about building trust and being comfortable to uncomfortable. If the CEO is really looking at that board for that key role as advisory, you want a couple naysayers, not if it's an unhealthy way, but people that don't see things the same way. Because every now and then, we as CEOs might have missed something, or there might be a different way to do it. So, and if we're not getting challenged, and vice versa, so we need the whole makeup of that board, including from that aspect, is so important. How the whole nomination and governance process works.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So once everybody understands their lane, the next challenge becomes moving in the same direction. How should boards and executive teams work together during strategic planning without blurring their respective responsibilities?
Yeah. So if we're doing this for the context, it's a somewhat mature, decent size nonprofit with a bunch of staff and have a board. That's kind of the lens. Because the small ones, it might be different. So I'm going to answer it with that lens of a little bit larger, more mature nonprofit. Um, here's how I approach it. That the staff leadership team should own a lot of the initial work. They're the ones on the ground. They're the ones that are knowing. And strategy to me is not 10 years. It's barely 3 years just because the world changes so fast. And they're the ones that are out there delivering, doing, hearing from their staff on a daily basis, hearing from constituents. So the actual initial work on 3 year goals, financial, non-financials, what kind of capabilities do we need to develop down to for that next fiscal year? What are our top priorities? What are our financial goals? I really think that starts at the staff level. It then should be brought to the board, not just to be beat up, but to be processed. And here's where two real cool things can happen. It'll get tweaked. It'll get challenged in kind of the healthy way we were doing. And then the board will align or it'll be tweaked in alignment. And then there's that opportunity to have the from an execution standpoint, the board's role in that strategic plan and the staff leadership's role. Because not just with having a board and a staff, but I keep trying to think of something better to call strategic planning, because I think it's got a terrible name and well earned. I've even been guilty of this when I was a CEO. Of you get together, you do some team building, which is critical, important stuff. You do some really strategic thinking, you chart some things out, and 3 months later, you're doing business like you already always did business.
Right.
And that's probably honest in both, and I work in both worlds, for profit and probably out companies. That's probably, I'll be generous, 80, it might be 95% of the time. So to be able to do it and bifurcate it and then bring it together, and then literally your 1 year plan, which I'm a big believer, you should never plan for more than 1 year. There's no way. Even quarter by quarter is a challenge. And then all your execution items and your quarterly priorities, individual priorities, that you can do for the board in a super healthy way and for the staff. They're all aligned to that long-term goal that's going to pull us. You now have
Yeah.
alignment on that 3 year, where you're going to be in 3 years and what you need to do to get there. And then for that fiscal year, the staff know what they're leading, the board know what they're leading. They all come together to accomplish that 1 year and lead us towards the three
I
years.
see. Yeah. So the things you operationalize or you put the benchmarks to
Right.
and you measure and all of
Yeah.
that are
Yeah.
really more not near term because it's 12 months, but it's shorter
Oh,
duration
short term,
than
even down to the quarter. And if
yeah.
I'm working with an organization regular, they actually have 13-week sprints where it's down to the week. And
Yeah.
what's cool that happens using that same nonprofit talk about where we're doing it with the board and the leadership team is literally the leadership team. And I'm not saying these are what theirs were, but like all the governance things, whether that's number of nominations and what their plan is to continue to, whether it's to grow the board or keep the board viable and strong and understand what they need and get it. If the board's playing a fundraising role, they might have some metrics, or whether they're dollars or identifying and bringing in prospects or stewarding, don't whatever it is. The board literally, and what's nice about it is now you don't have the, oh, it's the staff aren't doing, oh, the board's not doing. Part of that alignment is clarity on ownership and what we're measuring. And then at the end of that quarter, whatever that board meeting is, there's literally, just like with the staff, there's no debate of what success was going to look like. Were you successful, and what stood in your way where you weren't? So you can
Yeah.
actually
Great.
get the board and the staff on that same cadence, that same expectation, just very different stuff.
Mhm. And then as these new opportunities, even with a great plan, emerge or crisis or crises emerge, how do effective leaders decide what gets attention and what should kind of wait?
You just asked me one of my favorite questions, and I didn't even
Oh,
ask you
good.
to, so thank you. Um, so by doing all the kind of stuff we've been talking about, Chris, and therefore you're gonna have a clear number one singular priority for the year, a singular priority for the quarter, and a handful of sub priorities. That lets you push things off the plate just in regular, forget about the crisis. Most organizations are spending 80% of their time on urgent, not important, on things that
Mm.
don't move the needle externally or internally. So by having that clarity and then that cadence of discussions on the board side and the staff side, it's real easy. And then when that crisis happens, you know where you have to be going, you know what you can give up, you know where you can do, you know whose functions and roles are. It doesn't mean every crisis is easy and you're going to solve it in a minute, but it helps you have the discipline and focus of who and how and what we can move around, whether that's a financial crisis or, God forbid, I don't want to say that, but a facility crisis or a funding change crisis, whatever it is. It
Yeah.
allows you to be much more quickly reactive and in many cases actually proactive.
Are there certain routines or habits that keep alignment strong throughout the year instead of only during board meetings?
Yeah, a couple of that I can think of, and some of those will be more just for leadership team, others will be for that CEO and board chair and board. Um, I do think there should be some type of reporting dashboard, whatever one wants to call it, um, for the board. That's going to have some of the key high level key metrics that may have no direct responsibility, but they're seeing on a monthly basis. Because we all know you send them the quarterly financials, half of them don't know how to read it, and but if you can highlight it to the things that really matter, financial metrics or non-financial, number of participants, number served, promoter score, whatever those key metrics are for that organization, that should go out to the board every month. Whether even if you're only meeting with the board once a quarter, keep that board up to date, mark them red, yellow, and green, or highlight the celebrations and the concerns. So a cadence, just like you do with staff of daily huddles and weeklies and monthlies, a regular cadence of communication with the board, I think is really important to keep them
Yeah.
engaged and aware and operating. I think the whole board agenda usually is not well constructed. It's a lot of reporting. It's a lot of documents and approving minutes, stuff that doesn't need brilliant, passionate people that want to be visionary and strategic. So, are you creating those monthly, every other month, or quarterly meetings where you're having those kind of strategic conversations? You're using a consent agenda and all the reports and the minutes and even the financial that's taking up 2 minutes of your meetings. And are you filling your meetings with conversations where you need and want advice, guidance, input from the board and or the board needs to be involved in those conversations.
Mm, yep. Yep. I get it. Well, I love the dashboard concept, the meetings, the communication, the follow-up. It's the accountability functions, right? It's so important. But we're not operating in a perfect world. There are tensions, trust issues, and what I wanted to kind of dip into quickly before going on to the future
Hmm.
in this particular area is understanding what some of the early warning signs are that trust between a board and an executive team are beginning to erode. Are there telltale signs?
Yeah, I think there are some. I mean, some probably if that board chair and or that CEO are really being self-aware, it should just come up by the kind of conversations you're having or not having. The surprises you're having or not having. So within that relationship, if at least one of those people are self-aware and then comfortable calling on the carpet, that's one. And I think in the board meetings and for the board overall and the ELT is just that they're probably short of that emergency that just happened. If there's anything that are real surprises to either the staff leadership or the board, that probably means you're not having the right conversations, you're not sharing the right information, you're not being transparent enough, honest enough, direct enough.
Right.
Um, or if there's a lot of uncivil discourse, board
Mm, yeah.
member to board member, board member to CEO or other leadership team, as we mentioned, challenging, debating, calling things out, beautiful. Uncivil discourse, accusations, personalizing, not so much.
Yep.
So are you starting to see that where clearly trust isn't there, relationships haven't been built, and that happens way too often, and on both sides of the ledger, staff side and board side, to me would be an indication that you don't have alignment. Or when you're having conversations about a investment opportunity, new program, outreach opportunity, growth area, pulling reserves in to cover some new venture, whatever it might be, changing staff structure and adding some capacity. If your conversations are just around that one thing and you're trying to make a decision on that one item or just simply what the balance sheet or financials say, you probably don't really have an alignment on purpose, on goals and vision or strategy. Because for almost anything, that's what should be pulling and guiding that discussion. And if that's not where it's coming from, you probably don't have alignment or education or awareness. And you probably got to go back and start building that foundation again.
Yeah, very good. And I imagine there is an opportunity to recover from these episodes where trust is damaged, but is there a process that you recommend organizations take to kind of repair trust, to get themselves back into alignment?
Yeah, I'll give a quick answer to that, and I'll also give a couple pointers of how to avoid on all ends of getting there.
Okay.
I mean, the repair trust, I think, comes from everybody being grown-ups, which sadly is also not always common. Whichever way it is, whether the trust of the board chair has eroded or the trust of the CEO is as soon as either party or group is feeling that way, find the way to have that conversation. Because the longer you delay it, the longer the animosity builds up, the longer the resentment builds up, and the more likely it's to be unhealthy. And it really becomes, if I'm the CEO and I have issues with the board chair, and I don't say anything, I don't say anything, I don't say anything, it's really my fault, not the board chair's fault that that relationship is deteriorating or things aren't moving or we're not getting the alignment. And in many cases, it's not a plug for coaches. This is where having a growth coach, a business coach, an executive coach, working with one or both, because they'll see that and many times an outside perspective can be healthy. If that isn't there, there could be another board member or someone that has that good relationship in the middle that can bridge it. I think the most important thing is how you build it and prevent it, Chris. And I'm a big believer in being diligent at part, whether they're your ELT meetings or your board meetings, there should be a section that's intentionally to build cohesion and trust. I
Okay.
do I do good news in every meeting I'm at. Everybody's got to share personal and professional good news. Sounds silly, can be done super quick, but it frames everything from a positive mindset. Right away, you're starting that meeting, that conversation. It's tiny, but it's super powerful. And then at
Hmm.
board meetings, yes, it might take, I mean, if you got 50 board members, it might be a problem. But if you've got 6, 8, 10, 12, 15, do a quick round and do some cohesion questions where you're starting to peel letters back. What number kid were you? Tell me about Sunday dinner at your house, whatever it might be. It sounds
That's
it
good. Yeah.
sounds hokey, but I'm telling you, if we got time, I can give you a quick example. It works. I have a leadership team, happens to be a nonprofit, great organization, brilliant people on the team. Been working with them for about a year. Lots of tension, did a lot of work to build the trust. Finally, at our last uh, annual to kick off the next year, pushed them hard to do the uncomfortable. And finally, they really put their issues on the table. And the strong tension, and one person that was highly frustrated started erasing. We did a whole exercise. I don't know if you've ever done any work with Lencioni's Working Genius and really letting people know what their zone of genius is. And I will tell you, because we had been building that trust and got it to where finally, and it's not an instant thing, people could throw things on the table. Their function chart completely changed. No one got fired, no one got promoted, no one got demoted, and they are 75% more effective and 100% more aligned and on board and happy. And that's what happens. That's like it was one of my most proud coaching moments because it was bad. It was taking hours and hours of our time. I was just facilitating and coaching and I was sweating and feeling the pain, let alone them. But if you put that intent into building trust, you will get there. Or those that can't won't be with you anymore, board or staff, and then you avoid and are much less likely to get to that dilemma that you started the question with. So be
Yeah. Yeah.
intentional around building trust in each other, trust you can count on the person, trust they're going to share and not just be a yes man or woman, but challenge in a respectful way, have radical candor, all that stuff. You got to be intentional on the board and staff and collective side if you're really going to develop.
Yeah. Yeah. And be adults.
Yeah, yeah, that's which we all
Easier
can be
said than done.
challenged with sometimes.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Ask my
So
wife.
I was just about to say that. Don't steal my line. Um, as we look ahead, we know one thing for certain is that leadership continues to evolve. And I wanted to understand how you see the relationship between boards and executive leadership teams evolving over the next decade? What's your expectation?
My expectation is that mindset continues to shift for the nonprofit overall. I'll go on my little soapbox for just 30 seconds.
Yeah,
I
please.
think mindset is what holds back most great nonprofits. Mindset, and that's on the board and the staff side. It's equally guilty from my perspective. That it's real easy to blame funders, blame government, blame board, blame staff. Oh, we have to do everything with less. None of that's good. So to me, my hope for the future, and I do think I see this changing a lot in just nonprofits I get involved with or with clients, that they adopt the mindset of healthy, growing, thriving businesses. That they really look at the world as abundant. And you tear down a lot of this competition between nonprofits or departments within a nonprofit or for donors, that the mindset's changed from scarcity in nonprofit to abundance, that we recognize that in the nonprofit world, overhead is absolutely not a bad word. It's an essential word. And some nonprofits, 80% overhead is too low. And some nonprofits, overhead, 10% is too high. There's no magic
Yeah.
number. It's how can
Yeah,
we be
right.
efficient and effective to do what we're doing today and get the growth we want to go to serve our constituents better, solve this problem better, and that the board is working with that CEO and leadership team the same way a board of advice, to some extent, the board of advisors of a company with. It's not going to be as much on EBITDA and shareholder value and that stuff, but it's going to be around we are here to advise and support, call you on your stuff, support you on your stuff, help with the vision, be a guide that what we're doing is helping us fulfill our purpose, achieve our mission, and get our goals. And that CEO will be treated in a way that he or she is guiding and driving and directing that ship to get there. Man, I think nonprofits would soar so much higher if they really just shift that mindset and start adjusting some of those things. And I do, from my limited perspective, see that happening more and more. Still a long way to go, but I do see that happening more and more.
hmm hmm Well, let's wrap up with two final questions,
Okay.
and they're related to the skills that are going to be important, relevant in this context in the future. So, what skills will nonprofit CEOs need that perhaps weren't as important, let's say, 10 years ago?
I think having the leadership mindset and capability to own and look at revenue opportunities.
Okay.
Donors are changing. They're not the same as they were. Donating sources are changing. And I do think nonprofit leaders, CEO on the staff side, that might be hiring the right people to do that. But leading from a strategy and open-mindedness and empowerment standpoint, that we got to look at those fingers pointing back at us and how are we going to diversify our revenue, grow different streams of revenue, be that earned revenue or contributed revenue, and
Mhm.
really kind of have that mindset. I do think the CEOs of nonprofits, if we look out, 10, 15 years, are going to have to adapt to and should adapt to technology, AI, the whole shift in the world, not just because AI can be terrible and bad, and it can be incredibly impactful and creating efficiencies, that they have to be open to change and change technology world. And here I'm going to take a little bit of leaf, but also how all of this is changing, generationally changing mindsets and how people think and look at the world and look at communing and communicating. That I do think in 10, 20 years, I'll sound like an old curmudgeon, I think for the worst, but I think just the whole nature of relating and connecting and communicating is going to be very different than it is today, and definitely than it was 10, 15 years ago. So be able to adapt and learn from all that. And
Yeah.
have, I guess my last one, have confidence and conviction. Don't worry about your job. Do what you know and believe is right to fulfill what you're doing and to drive that organization forward. Be brave.
Yeah, be brave. Good, good, good. Well, um, likewise, what capabilities or skills will great board members need to develop in that future?
I think coaching to really have enough of the board members and definitely the board chair to really be able to listen and ask questions. 99% of the time, don't prescribe, don't tell the other board members or definitely that CEO what to do or how to do it, but to really improve listening skills. And to me, questioning skills, skills of asking questions and coaching is one and the same. When, my big skill set is I know how to ask questions. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
it's really, really important because the power they're going to bring to that organization and the support and ahas they're going to bring to that CEO and that leadership team is going to be so much more powerful. And in light of all the changes that I brought up before, that's going to be more and more important. And that passion and even pocketbook is not enough to be a board member.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Well, Stuart, this has been an outstanding conversation. Congratulations on making it through number two.
All right, I look
Um,
forward to at some point to number three. I got to stay in
you
first
bet.
place.
We'll get it on the calendar for sure. Yeah, yeah. We'll make sure that you stay in the lead or pole position. But one of the themes that stood out throughout our discussion is that nonprofit organizations don't thrive simply because they have talented executives or accomplished board members. They thrive when those leaders operate as partners, united
100%.
by common mission, aligned around shared priorities, and respectful of the distinct roles that each needs to play. When governance and management complement one another rather than compete with one another, it's clear that better decisions are made, stronger cultures are built, and greater impact is possible. But again, Stuart, thank you for sharing your wisdom and expertise with us. And thank you to our audience for joining us on the Nonprofit Edge. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, share this episode with a fellow nonprofit leader, and join us next time as we continue exploring the ideas shaping the future of nonprofit leadership. Thanks, all.
Thank you for joining us for the Nonprofit Edge, a podcast series to promote purpose in practice. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation and learned some important lessons from our featured expert. We always want our content to be informative and to position nonprofit leaders to succeed. Please join us again for our next podcast. In the meantime, we wish you all the best and encourage you to learn more about Fulcrum Nonprofit Leadership by visiting our website at www.fulcrumleader.com.